I'm Blake Holden with the Cognitive Portfolio, and today I have with me John Mayer, Executive Director of CALI, the Center for Computer Assisted Legal Instruction. CALI is a nonprofit edtech organization providing tools and services for legal education through technology. Among the many impressive accolades and accomplishments, CALI's platform is used at nearly every law school in the United States. Thank you for joining us today, John.
Glad to be here.
It's a pleasure. Before we talk about CALI, why don't you tell the audience a little about yourself and your EdTech journey?
Wow, where to start? Graduated with a degree in computer science from Northwestern, and a few years, skipped a couple of jobs later. I got a job at a law school as eventually their IT director. The most interesting thing about that is they built a brand new building. And there is nothing more tech intensive for a school than when they build, a brand new building, because they want to know what the tech is that's going to be in the classrooms. They want to know what the tech is going to be in the offices. They want to know the projection systems. There was like 20 different committees, and I was on every single one because there was a tech issue around every aspect of the building. After 7 years as the IT director that was at Chicago Kent College of Law, part of IIT, I got the job at CALI as the executive director. I convinced them not to hire a law professor or a lawyer, but that they needed someone who understood entrepreneurship and technical operations for what they wanted to accomplish. And I've been there ever since. So since 1994, 27 years. GAC.
That sounds like you've had a really long and interesting career, especially in the edtech space. I'm excited to learn more about it. Moving on to CALI, could you tell us about the product and how it's improving the higher education space in law?
Sure. So CALI got started way back in the 80s. They were incorporated in 1982 when University of Minnesota and Harvard Law School. There were some faculty there working on what they call intelligent tutor systems. Actually, it was run out of a mainframe at the time. They later, of course, moved to PCs and things like that. But the thing that that CALI is most well known for is what we call CALI lessons. They are interactive, self-paced tutorials. They're not flashcards. They're not videos. They present a textual hypothetical to the student on a particular area of law, and then they pepper the student with questions about that hypothetical, like, is this legal? Is this hearsay? Is this admissible? And then if the student gets it right or wrong, it could branch one or the other way. If they got an easy question wrong, it might do some remedial work. If they got a hard question right, it might say, did you guess? And so there's over 1,000 of those tutorials that we publish. They're written by mostly tenured law faculty. They take 30 to 40 minutes for a student to complete. And they get used 600,000-700,000 times a year by students at almost every law school in the country.
That's really impressive. Having that background and being able to help that many students, especially something that's so interactive, definitely has a deep impact on the community. Although CALI was founded nearly 40 years ago, the organization keeps coming up with new projects and manages to stay at the top of the edtech scene in law education. How does CALI adapt to new scenarios, stay relevant, and future thinking?
Well, we look specifically for projects not as a series of one-offs, but as a series of ideas that we think have room to scale. So we try not to build throwaway stuff. Things that's like, wow, that was interesting. It was like, well, it's only interesting if we can then turn it around into something that we can do a lot more of. So for instance, the old CALI lessons, the very first ones, used to take 3 or 4 hours to run. They would take months or a year to develop because a programmer had to sit at the elbow of a law professor for a long time. Our new model is we have an authoring system that by today's standards could be called a no-code system. We train faculty in cohorts of 5 or 6 of them and they write the lessons themselves using our tool. Um, we do it in a fellowship model where we make them write lessons and then we make them review each other's work in a round robin sort of way. And then we have an external anonymous editorial board that also reviews their work. So there's multiple checks on quality such that we can punch out 30 or 40 lessons a year from a group of 5 or 6 faculty, and we pay them for their time, all in one subject area. And we've been doing those fellowships since 1999, so over 20 years, and they've produced over 400 new lessons for us in that time.
That's really interesting. It sounds like you have a very dedicated group that's able to produce a lot of material that is really usable. What are some of the obstacles CALI has faced along the years?
Well, the main obstacle is all the usual obstacles that are happening in edtech. Teachers are afraid that we're creating robot teachers. You're trying to replace us. It's like, not at all, not at all. No more so than your textbook replaces you, or no more so than study guides, would replace the instructor. We believe our materials are for the faculty to figure out where to insert in the curriculum, and secondarily for the student who's like, I'm not tracking this. I need another way to see the same material. And so they come to our website and they say, all right, we're studying rule against perpetuities. The instructor, I didn't get it. The book is too dense. I'm going to run the CALI lesson and see if another bite at that apple will help me through understanding this. And so we find ourselves either as a primary learning resource when the instructor assigns our materials, or a secondary source when the students come to us themselves.
One of the important things that I think differentiates CALI is that it's being introduced into an education field that has a different approach to learning. Could you please speak to that learning method and the ways in which CALI really implements their technology to supply, or not nearly replace, but be a good supplementary material to help students get through these very rigorous higher education schools?
Well, law faculty like to say that they don't just stand there and lecture. They use something called the Socratic dialogue. The Socratic dialogue, in a nutshell, is I'm going to give you a hypothetical, and then I'm going to say, well, what if I change the facts this way, and would that be true if the rules were different, or something like that? And they bounce back and forth between students, not trying to trip them up, but challenging them to have facts and responsibility, be able to respond, right on their fingertips. So strangely, this is why when in the 80s or in the 70s, even some law faculty saw programmed instruction, they said, wow, this kind of maps on the Socratic dialogue. In other words, the computer can ask the question, and then the student can answer, and then the computer can come back with a different response based on the response of the student. So it could be a decision tree, an expert system, technically, depends on how complex it gets, that is adaptive to the student's responses, much like a faculty member would be inside the classroom. And so that's our model, is to be a Socratic dialogue programmed instruction. Now, it's not nearly as responsive as a human being would be. In other words, it's a decision tree, but it's what I would call a highly pruned tree. There aren't a lot of branches, there aren't an infinite number of branches. We're not using artificial intelligence or machine learning here. And I'm not sure we could, because of the complexity of the law and the complexity of student responses. But this is one of those situations where perfect is the enemy of good enough, where our things are good enough to get the point across and to affect learning, or to give students, good teaching within a box.
What kind of transformations has legal education undergone, and what were CALI's biggest contributions to the process?
Oh, good. I get to talk about something else. So besides CALI lessons, another thing we're working on, and this isn't high tech, but it's transformational, is publishing case books. Now you think, wow, there's lots of people out there publishing, textbooks in higher ed and case books in law. But just like in all higher ed, those books have gotten ridiculously expensive, right? $250, $300 a book. And that's bad. But that's not why we got into it. We got into it because faculty want to do experimental things with their courses, but the book is this rigid thing that they can't touch, right? They have to buy it. Even if they get an ebook version, it's digital rights management, such that they can't do anything. So the books that we publish are Creative Commons. That lets the faculty member take the Microsoft Word version, and if they want to add notes in the margin, they want to highlight the things that they think are important, they want to put links out to videos that they've created and put up on YouTube. Or even better, the student can take the Microsoft Word version and they could throw chapters up on the Google Docs, and then study groups could get together and say, we're all going to take our notes in one place, all keyed into the actual text that we're studying. And so we look at open OER, open education resources, as a innovative model of, what's the word, enabling innovation. And then the fact that the books are free is just like, the icing on the cake. And we're starting to have an effect. I know that the publishers hate my guts, and faculty are coming to us and saying, I like that idea, and I want to do that. And so, we published 40 or 50 books in the last couple of years. They get downloaded 100,000 times, and the students love us because it's a cheap book.
After graduating college just a few short years ago, I can definitely attest that I would have preferred my $200 textbooks to be cost very little or nothing at all. That would have been my preference as well.
Yeah.
What other ways do you see legal education evolving over the next decade, and what part does CALI play in that evolution?
Well, one of the big problems, or one of the big complaints about legal education, is it's too cerebral. You learn to think like a lawyer. You memorize a lot about the law, and you don't know anything about practice. So the first time a client is sitting across from you, you're like, I don't know what to do. And it takes a few months, or it takes sitting at the elbow of an experienced attorney to get that sense of what to do. So law schools are worried about, how do we graduate practice-ready lawyers? And some of that is solved with what they call clinics, right? You can take classes that are clinics where you represent people in small claims, not small claims. You represent people by sitting second chair in criminal cases and things like that. But an awful lot of law practice these days is automated, which is to say, it's entirely done like this: meetings on Zoom, and when there was a pandemic, court cases on Zoom, or the production of lots of the same type of form. You either are writing wills all day long, you're writing letters all day long and stuff. So we have another project, which we call, it's the A2J Author Project. It's a piece of software that lawyers, legal aid attorneys, can use to automate court forms. And long story short, that's get used about 1 million times a year. It's helping out self-represented litigants in 40 different states. But we did it because we knew it would be a great teaching tool in schools. And so about 20 schools are offering courses where we show them and train them in A2J Author, and they get to learn how to automate an area of the law. It turns out that to automate something, you have to really understand it well. So it's not like easy. They're like, oh, this will be fun, I'll play with a computer. It's like, oh crap, I gotta really understand the ins and outs of an expungement, or of an uncontested divorce, or a temporary restraining order, or something like that. And in doing so, they build the flow chart that is that area of law, that is then turned around into an interview for a self-represented litigant, a client, who will then fill it out and get the document that they can then submit to the court themselves. So it's not really practice, training, but I think it's sort of like lays a foundation for where I think the future of law practice heck, the present of law practice is at. A lot, you're going to automate the boring stuff so that you have more time for the interpersonal stuff when it's a necessary part of your job.
That's really interesting that you're able to have that perspective, one that, may go counter to the current system. How would you say your background affects the way that you look at the industry and the areas that it can improve?
Ooh, I want to do interesting, cool projects, and I want them to matter. Which is to say, I don't want them to just be in a box. I want people that I do them for to say, this really helped. The interesting, cool projects are everywhere, but a lot of them go nowhere because, insufficient funding, can't find a market or something like that. The getting people to say that this really helped is a lot harder. You have to understand the business model. You have to understand the social, depending on where you're working. I work with courts and with legal aids and with law schools. You have to understand the social milieu that you work in. So even when we come up with like awesome technology ideas, like an app that will do something, a lot of those ideas fail when we realize this will never work in this market space. Lawyers will hate it, teachers won't use it, law schools won't adopt it. And so we always have to include that in our design specs, is how does this get adopted? How does this get used? And where's it going to end up, when it's getting used? So I at first was like, I just want to do tech stuff, that's human stuff. But I found that challenge to be in some ways as interesting, if not more interesting, is how you build something to spec, tech spec, and to spec culture spec, that will make a difference in people's lives.
We know that CALI has organized annual conferences since 1996. In what other ways has CALI contributed to incentivize and promote forms of collaboration within the industry?
Yeah, I should tell a quick story. The first conference was in 1991. We called it the Conference for Law School Computing Professionals. Long name. And it was a joke because there were no law school computing professionals at the time. We were trying to establish that they existed. And it's always been a conference where there within legal education, there's conferences for faculty, there's conferences for law librarians, there's even conferences for registrars and stuff, all verticals, and they don't overlap much. So we wanted a conference where the law librarians, the faculty, and the tech people would all show up and talk to each other, because we identified that as a problem, that we're all off in our offices doing this work, and we don't have honest communications with the people that we deal with. And that's what it's been for 30 years. It's been faculty talking about what they do, and tech people talking about what they do, and law librarians talking about what they do, and then attending each other's sessions to say, I didn't know you did it that way. Maybe we can work together on that. So the conference is the one thing. The fellowships that we do bring together 5 or 6 faculty from 5 different schools. And it's funny, they're paid, they write lessons, but the big thing they get out of it is like, I feel like I've made friends for life, because faculty don't collaborate much. They monk-like write their own stuff and prepare their own stuff. And so we get them out of their shell a little bit to collaborate. And this is key, to collaborate about teaching topics. They love to talk to each other about the law and the latest Supreme Court case, but to talk about teaching they don't get a lot of opportunities for that. So we do a lot of things that make them have conversations that they don't normally get to have.
What are some advantages that a nonprofit edtech organization has over a for-profit organization?
Oh, that's a great question. The number one advantage is if we come up with an idea and we say, this will really help the educational space that we're in. And it also will, ruin or damage the market for our product or something like that. If we were selling it, we could say, we don't care. We're trying to make a good product. If we're not worried that money is going to be lost because we're not selling. And so I know, there are great for-profits and startups and things like that, and they want to help society, but inevitably, a feature or a capability will show up and they'll be like, wow, this would be a great feature, but we'll have fewer sales. We're not going to do it because, they got to maximize money or optimize for income, especially if they have a lot of shareholders. And I don't have that problem. I get to pick the things that work instead of the things that will only optimize along one axis, dollars. So that's the number one reason for being a nonprofit. Second, I can do crazy things like give stuff away, right? I get money from the schools, their members, and I spend it paying people to write books, and then I give those books away. And even though that's not the point is to enable innovation. I get to use that as my incentive over that. Now, the downside of all this is I ain't getting rich. You know what I mean? I don't own stock in CALI. I'm an employee of a nonprofit. They pay, well enough, even at market rates, sort of, such that I'm not, eating cold soup and stuff like that. But I love what I do, and I get to do interesting projects all the time. So to me, that balances out.
That was one of the first things that I noticed was the passion in your voice for this venture. Could you talk about the ways that CALI is funded through grants, things of that nature that don't come from the gains earned from memberships?
Sure. Well, and I don't mind telling people about how we make our money. You can pull down our 990 from GuideStar. So there's about 200 law schools in the U.S. There's a few more. Like 98% of them are CALI members and have been for a long time. We charge $8,000 for them to be a member per year, which comes out to, depending on the size of the school, between $5 and $15 per student per year. So, that's cheap. So anyhow, $8,000 times 200 schools, our base budget is about 1.6 million. I've got 11 staff. Most of my expenses is staff. Maybe we pull in another 100 or 200,000 every year on grants or projects where people will give us money to do things that will, that help what they're doing. So for instance, there's a big nonprofit called Access Lex, and they wanted to do more on what they call law school success. So not CALI lessons on torts or contracts or property, but CALI lessons on how to study, how to prepare for finals, how to deal with mental health and depression issues in law school, and so on, what we call law school success lessons. So they gave us a bunch of money to do a fellowship of a bunch of lessons in that space. The A to J Author Project, we paid for part of it, and the Legal Services Corporation gave us some money, and I think we pulled in some money also from the State Justice Institute, and now we're looking for some other funders to expand that capability. It's strange though, right? Nobody wants to fund lawyers. Lawyers are bad people. It's not true, but you know what I mean. Lawyers don't have a great reputation in society, so it's hard to find nonprofit funding for that. But doing justice work or civic tech, which courts are, helps us make the case. But we're we're expanding our capability. We have a membership program for paralegal programs and undergraduate criminal justice programs. That's a lot cheaper. It's $250, and they get the same thing that a CALI member gets. But that pulls in another 30 or 40 or 50,000 a year as well.
That's really interesting. And you find different projects that have high impact versus, many of these for-profit organizations, and allows you to do some really interesting things in the space. What would be advice you would give to someone that is looking to get into the nonprofit edtech industry?
find something that scales. In other words, within 3 or 4 or 5 years, there's got to be enough money that such that you can you can build a spreadsheet and say, when we've got this number of members or this number of many people paying, will be sustainable. I've had lots of people come to me, or I've given advice to people in which there was like a blank spreadsheet 2 years out and no money there. And I said, you better have that like worked out in your head at least, and so that you have a goal towards working towards. Another one is a lot of people assume that when they come up with a product that they'll get 80% of the market to buy it. Like there's 120 or 130,000 law students out there. They think if they come out with a new study aid that we'll get 100,000 of the students to pay us $10, and that's $1 million every year. And what they don't realize is how incredibly difficult it is to find those 100,000 students. There's not a mailing list you can buy. You can't just, you can't, there's no magazine that they all read. They're spread out all over the internet in terms of the websites that they go to. It's very hard to market to certain niches. I'm just using law school students as an example. Because if you're doing a nonprofit project, you're probably focusing on a relatively narrow vertical. It might be domestic violence or immigration or environmental justice or whatever it might be. And as a result, the number of people who are passionately enough interested in that space to fork over money for it is going to be narrow as well. And so you're going to have to fight for attention and for space and for, cash from those folks. I don't know. I feel like, CALI, we're naturally limited by the fact that there's only 200 law schools in the United States. It's just enough to sustain us for what we're doing. I have a back burner full of projects though, that if I had another million or another $10 million, I could lay waste to these projects. I could do some awesome things. But there's no way I could go to the membership, or I have gone to the membership and said, give me twice as much or 3 times as much money and I'll do great things. And they're like, yeah, we're fine, John. They can only handle so much technological change at a time. And so you have to go the speed that you're being allowed to go, unless you got like, $1 billion, like, Elon Musk or something like that, or Jeff Bezos.
Sounds like we need to get, one of these billionaires involved to get things moving a little bit quicker. But before we wrap up, I'd love to hear about some of the things that CALI has on the horizon, or any areas that you would like to bring attention to that CALI is doing. Do you have anything to share?
Oh, wow. I don't know. Okay. I'll try to do one fun thing and one serious thing. So one fun thing we're working on. We did a game a while back. I was convinced that there's gamification in legal education. And the game is really simple. It's just a collection of cards with information about Supreme Court justices and famous cases and stuff like that. It's called time trial. And you put the cards up and you have to, all you get is the person's name or the case, and you have to decide where it is in time, is it before or after. So we put it out there and very few people wanted to play it. But we're working on a version of it that's a tournament version, so that it would be a situation like this. There'd be 2 of us and 2 people would be playing against each other, and there'd be scores. And what's interesting is we can show the people the answers. And if they memorize the answers, that's great. They learn about famous cases and Supreme Court justices and when laws were passed and stuff. And I'm hoping that we can get that as a fun way to learn the law going in the next couple of months or something like that. Serious. So the serious stuff is in our A to J space. So we've been doing A to J author for 15 years. We've automated about over 1,000 forms. They get used 1 million times a year. But last year we did a little study where we looked at like the 20 most simple but basic forms in every state, so 1,000 forms. and said, how many of those have been automated either by us or by somebody else? You know, we're not the only game in town. And the answer was 20%. And I'm like, well, these are the simple forms. This isn't complicated stuff. So we're working on, so I've got a pitch deck, and I've been going to foundations and others and saying, you know, give me $500,000. That'll get me started to automate the other 1,000 forms. And, you know, and the challenge is justifying, you know, helping poor people is great, but it has to save somebody money. It has to save the court money, or they have to see the return on investment in adopting it. And that's where we're struggling with. But to me, it's like easy. It's a no-brainer idea to automate the simple forms across all 50 states, you know, and let lawyers do real lawyer stuff, you know, counseling, litigation, and let the simple stuff be automated, so that you know, the cost of getting representation isn't so high.
John, if I had the money to do it, I would definitely support you.
Well, you know, one of the ways we might do it is to do a fundraiser. Those are, you know, but raising that type of money in a fundraiser is a challenge in of itself. So, but I'll keep you in mind.
Sounds good. John, is there any way that people can contact you or reach out or find and learn more about CALI?
Oh yeah, always email me, jmayer@cali.org. Follow me on Twitter, John P. Mayer, at John P. Mayer. And no, I'm not related to the rock star. I used to get some
that could be easily
of his
confused.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much for your time. It was great talking with you. I hope you have a great day.
That was great. Thanks you. Bye-bye.